So for tonight's show, we're going to start off talking about actually The Gifted. Eric and I kind of discussed doing a bunch of different things, and we thought we'd give The Gifted a shot. You can actually watch The Gifted right now, actually on Hulu. We're going to be talking about episode 1. Read you the episode, just the synopsis here real quick that comes off of IMDb. It just says, in a world where mutated humans are treated with distrust and fear, an institute for mutants battles to achieve peaceful coexistence with humanity. Now, The Gifted, this is, of course, the original episodes from 2017. Again, you can watch this streaming on Hulu. The Gifted is very much in the X-Men universe. I can't really tell if it's supposed to be the movie universe or the comic universe. It's a little nebulous. It primarily focuses on X-Men characters that you might be familiar with. For example, Polaris has a pretty large role in it, at least this first episode. And then, what's her name? Blink actually shows up, although they don't really use their code names very much. But anyhow, I suggested this just because I thought it would be interesting, because we're looking for another show that would be kind of current and contemporary. And so we just thought we would give this one a shot. So tell me, Eric, what were your initial impressions of this first episode of The Gifted?
Well, I thought to back up a little bit because I did do some research about the issue we're talking about as far as the continuity problem or continuity thing with this. Apparently, the idea of The Gifted was that they wanted to do an X-Men TV show without the X-Men. So, and I don't know if that was for rights reasons or because they didn't want to have, kind of like I think maybe they wanted to do the opposite of what DC has done, where DC has like multiple versions of the same character in multiple formats. For instance, there's a Flash TV show on CW. And yet we have a Flash in the Justice League movie, and there's supposed to be a standalone Flash movie in that continuity, whereas the TV show has nothing to do with the continuity of the movie. And I think that was what they were struggling with when they were trying to make The Gifted. They were struggling with the fact that the movies were very popular, and they didn't know how to reconcile continuity problems. But at the same time, by the time The Gifted came out, there were already all sorts of continuity problems within the X-Men film franchise. In fact, anybody who's seen Days of Future Past knows that in some ways, that movie was supposed to kind of fix some of those continuity errors. Spoiler alert, it did one of the best things in X-Men film franchise history, in my opinion, because it erased X-Men 3. So, which I thought was awesome because I hate X-Men 3. And so there were already continuity issues within the films themselves. So my understanding in the marketing of this film, which was kind of muddled and a lot of people didn't understand it, was that they were trying to kind of have it both ways. So they do say in the series itself that the X-Men have disappeared. So you can take it as, okay, the X-Men that you knew and loved in the Fox films, they've disappeared. This still has continuity with it. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that are going on where you're kind of like, well, this doesn't really seem to fit with the films. And they were kind of almost doing sort of a multiverse thing where they were kind of, because that was already kind of introduced anyway, because that's what was going on with the films. So I think that's kind of part of the confusion. And I think it was very confusing and off-putting to a lot of fans because they didn't really understand that. It took me a while to explain that. And quite frankly, a lot of you are probably still scratching your heads being like, what did he just say? So it is a little bit confusing where this fits in. And I will say personally, I like the MCU approach a lot better. I like the fact, for instance, that the Daredevil series on Netflix, at least originally, fell into the continuity of the greater MCU. And I like that approach. I like it more than I like the DC approach. And I consider myself a DC guy. And so I think for a lot of fans, myself included, that's what kind of makes The Gifted kind of weird, is you're not really sure where it's supposed to fit in. I think the best way you could look at this is sort of as a multiverse, as sort of like, I don't know, like there's even the producers have said that this is supposed to fall in somewhere in between the last X-Men film and Logan, because obviously in Logan, the mutant population has been decimated. So this is supposed to almost be like a precursor to Logan. That's my understanding, if you want to look at it that way. So it's a little bit confusing if you're a hardcore Fox X-Men fan, if you really liked the movies, which I liked a lot of the movies, I don't like all of them. I didn't like a lot of the new cast, quite frankly, and I didn't like a lot of the directions that they were going in. Although I did like Days of Future Past, where the two casts met each other. So The Gifted falls somewhere else, and I think people know by now I'm a lore guy, I'm a continuity guy. So for me, I always appreciate when a series tries to be within the continuity and tries to at least have some references to the continuity. Like I said, they do reference the X-Men in this show, but I kind of would have liked to have had like a cameo by at least one of the primary X-Men film cast or something like that. Like maybe even if it was a flashback and we saw how they died or something along those lines. So that's probably one of my biggest problems with this show in the beginning of it, is that I kind of want it to fit better with what I've seen before. And this first episode to me seems more of the same. It seems like it's kind of something we've seen before. I think it's ironic that we're reviewing this after we reviewed Code 8. And Dave, you brought up the point that it's kind of like we've seen this story so many times in very many ways. The Code 8 story is very much like an X-Men story. And The Gifted, I think, still has that same kind of problem. And I kind of propose an idea of how you could kind of get over that problem, and The Gifted doesn't do that. So for me, that's kind of my initial impression, because it's not like I go into this, with open arms, and I go into this unbiased. To me, I would like to have seen it have kind of more of a continuity with the X-Men films. What about you, Dave?
Well, I would have liked more of a tight continuity, because that was my initial impression. That's the thing I felt like it was sort of most lacking. But here's the crazy thing: listening to you describe what you had researched and learned about the show, because I had suggested this, but I didn't dig too far into the background of the show. But listening to you, I'm like going, well, they've already done this. Okay, so some people in the audience may remember a TV show called Mutant X. Now, Mutant X was on syndication. Well, here we got a comment from James. Oh, man, Q Jump franchises have messed with the continuity again. Yes, he did. And ironically enough, we will be talking about John Delancey a little bit later this evening, which I was pleasantly surprised to realize we will. He shows up on something.
By the way, anyhow, I didn't remember that either, Dave. That'll be interesting to talk about, because I didn't remember that.
I totally forgot all about it. So yeah, no, they've done this before. There was a TV series in syndication called Mutant X. Some people might remember the show. The big person I remember being that was John Shea. John Shea actually played Lex Luthor in the Dean Cain, Terry Hatcher, Lois and Clark Superman television series, which I quite enjoyed back in the day. But yeah, from 2001, Mutant X was basically supposed to be an X-Men series, but they couldn't use the X-Men. So it was actually based off of X Factor, but they changed so much stuff in it. It wasn't X Factor. It wasn't X-Men. It was its own weird hybrid thing that seemed to kind of reference things, but didn't reference things, and never really kind of fit in, which I think is exactly what we're talking about here with The Gifted. Ironically enough, Mutant X ran a total of 3 seasons. The Gifted currently has 2 seasons available. I think the 3rd season may have been canceled with actually the Disney buyout, so maybe it was not originally intended to be canceled. But anyhow, it's just kind of funny. I just feel like this is history repeating itself with The Gifted. So my initial impressions of this are, it was okay. I didn't dislike it. The character I thought was the most interesting. Looks like I'm not sure how much of a role he's going to play, because he actually wasn't in the show very much. So I was kind of surprised. But yeah, and it was a bit confusing. That was my initial impression. It was okay, and I found it kind of confusing. Yes, I think I'm going to be ready to actually start talking spoilers here in just a minute. So did you feel that way too, Eric? Was your initial impression kind of like mine? It was sort of like, it was okay.
That would probably be the easiest way to sum it up. It's like, it was okay. To put it in perspective, obviously we didn't have a show last week. Okay, so it's been 2 weeks since our last show. I still haven't watched the second episode because I haven't felt any need to. I mean, that's what does that tell you? You know what I mean? So, did you want to get into some spoilers and talk about some specifics?
Yeah, we can get into some spoilers. So yes, we're going to be talking about spoilers now about the first the first episode of The Gifted. I think the basic gist of it is that there's we kind of follow two different groups, and then eventually they sort of come together. Essentially, by the two different groups I'm talking about, we have kind of what remains of sort of like the West Coast Avengers branch of the X-Men, kind of where they're sort of like trying to continue the X-Men's mission. It's not quite clear if they were directly connected to them. I mean, I think they were. I don't know. It doesn't quite make sense. But anyhow, so you have sort of like an offshoot rogue group of X-Men that's still around. And in this group, this is where you have Polaris, for example. I think Polaris is probably the mutant character I recognized the first and seemed to be the most kind of on point. The other characters, a lot of them, I couldn't recognize who they were half the time, except for Blink. I knew who Blink was, but Blink kind of shows up later. So the show just starts off with them in the midst of they're trying to help someone out, and Polaris, one of the characters gets shot by the police, and Polaris takes her anger out on this cop and almost kills this cop. And then this brings down the what were they called, Eric? They were like the Sentinel something. It's like the Sentinels, but it's human beings at first. So
Yeah, it's like the Sentinel Agency or something like that. I don't remember the exact term, but although there are Sentinels as well, they have their own version of Sentinels as well. But initially we're introduced to these federal agents who I think are supposed to also be analogous to Homeland Security and things like that. And they are, like you said, they're human beings, and it's like the Sentinel Agency. I can't remember the exact term.
Yeah, and they kind of come across kind of like as the agents from the Matrix kind of idea. They show up and everyone's like, oh no. So anyhow, they show up to investigate this situation, and then the X-Men end up basically they save not the X-Men, this gifted group of satellite X-Men, I guess. They basically managed to escape, and now they're kind of like on the Sentinel Agency's radar or whatever. And then at the same time, we're kind of following this family, and amongst the family, there's this kid who something's happened with. They might have been more specific, but I don't remember exactly what the deal was. But the kid had done something previously, and he's kind of grounded on house arrest. And he's not supposed to be leaving the house, but he goes with the sister to a high school dance. And then
the kid's being bullied. That's what the issue is with the kid. The kid's being bullied. He's been in some fights, and I think that's why they're telling him, hey, don't go out. They're trying to protect him.
So he's at the high school dance, the sister's there, and then the bullies see the one kid, and so they decide to try and bully him. And in the midst of all this, we discover that the son has mutant abilities that he doesn't quite understand how to control because they emerge for the first time. He almost destroys like the high school gym where the dance is going on. And then his sister actually comes to his aid. And then it turns out that his sister has mutant abilities, and she understands, at least a nascent ability. She understands how to use her powers to a certain extent. And in the midst of all this, we also learned that their father actually works for a different group that's not the Sentinel Agency, but he's involved with arresting and prosecuting or something, actually mutants. So it's sort of like, the guy who's in charge of keeping the mutant population and situation under control on a more local level, not a federal level. Both of his children have mutant abilities, and he doesn't know about this. So this incident occurs. The kids go back home. The Sentinel Agency shows up to arrest the kids. The mother tries to intervene. some chaos. The kids try to help them out and basically mark them where they're basically being pursued. So then it just turns into like a pursuit show where they're trying to catch them kind of thing, and they're trying to stay one step ahead. The father knows how to actually contact the X-Men. He actually contacts this satellite group of X-Men, and they're like, hey, if you spring our person, we'll help your family out. So they kind of make a deal. And then they're at a parking garage structure when they decide to try and make the deal. And that's where we see the television show's version of the Sentinels, which is kind of like these weird spidery robot kind of guys. They're kind of interesting. I prefer the giant, more humanoid mech robot kind of idea. But so they have these little spidery, creatures that are robots that are trying to take them out, these versions of Sentinels. So, which again reminded me of more the Sentinels, the Squid Sentinels from the Matrix again. Keeps coming back to the Matrix for some reason. Anyhow, so the episode ends with some of them get away, and it looks like the father doesn't. And then the big thing is, are they going to be able to get everybody back together? And then, like I said, my initial, as far as the spoiler conversation goes, the one character, I can't remember his character's name, but he's the actor who actually used to be on True Blood. He was the one who I thought actually was going to have a much larger role actually in the show. He's in the show quite a bit, but he's not really quote unquote the star. And I thought he was the star. I thought he was sort of like Stephen Moy is his name. He plays Reed Strucker. And I had thought he was more of a like Magneto, Professor X kind of guy, and he was going to be the one kind of running the X-Men, but then it turns out he's just the father of these two kids. That's not the role that he's playing out at all. So it was just sort of not what I was expecting at all. It was kind of fun to see Blink actually, and Polaris for a little bit, even though they're kind of hard to see who they are at times. And then a lot of the other mutant characters, I think they're mostly new. So yeah, like I said, my whole thing with this show is it was okay, but I feel like I managed to pick another show that I think we're going to be like, I don't know if I want to watch any more of this. So tell me, Eric, now that we can talk spoilers, what was the thing that you liked the most about the show? Let's lead off with a positive.
The thing I liked the most. That's an interesting question there. I thought it was shot pretty well. I didn't think it had a cheesy TV factor, which is something you always have to worry about when you're doing something like this on television as opposed to doing it on film. So the production values were fairly strong to me. I thought the effects were decent. You know what I mean? Like they didn't look too cheesy to me. So I would say the production value is pretty high for a television show. That's probably the thing that impressed me the most with this series. Is it looked good? It looked okay. I didn't have anything to nitpick about that. Where I was like, well, that looked really cheesy. That looked, it's definitely not cinema quality. Don't get me wrong there. But it was shot very well, and the effects I thought were good enough for television. That's probably what I liked about it the most. But as you mentioned, the setup and everything is kind of something that we've seen a million times before, and I'm not sure that this series offered anything new.
That's probably a good way to sum it up. And that was the thing. Like I've said this. I think I said this in the last episode. It's like I don't mind if you give me a story that I've seen before, as long as you give me something interesting to hold on to. And that was the thing. Or you give me some characters I like. Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel as long as it's
compelling characters.
Yeah.
Compelling characters is what you need, not archetypes and stereotypes. You need compelling characters.
Yeah. And like I said, it's like I could recognize who Polaris was. And I enjoyed seeing Polaris because I have an affinity for the character because I've read the comics. But the problem is, for the rest of these characters in the show, I couldn't tell you who any of them are supposed to be. And I think that's part of the problem. It's like if if the guy here, like at first I was thinking he was supposed to be Havoc, but as the show goes on, it's pretty clear it's not supposed to be Havoc. I'm not sure who he's supposed to be. But it's just sort of like, it's like, oh, well, that's not Havoc and Polaris. Okay. And then as it just kind of went on, it didn't have, I wasn't too terribly interested in what was going to happen to these characters moving forward, I guess is the problem. It's sort of like, where they left it, I'm like, I'm good. It's not a bad show. I mean, it's like Eric said, the production values are pretty high, and it's not like it's the worst thing I've ever seen. I mean, it was okay. But I think, unfortunately for me, there's just not enough X-Men goodness for me to stick around. Like if they were still at the X Mansion, for example, no, that'd probably bring me back for a second episode. But it's just, they're so far removed from the X-Men. There's no outfits. There's no whatever. That there's not any low-hanging fruit for me to want to follow to another episode. Does that make sense?
Makes a ton of sense. One thing that I really question is there's a lot of underutilized X-Men that are actually very popular that have either appeared in only, say, one film, or they made like a cameo appearance in the films, and we've never really seen them in live action. And I'm like, why didn't you use some of them? And you don't have to necessarily go with the continuity if there's continuity issues, because they didn't want to sync the TV series with the films because the films were still being made at the time. I get those kind of production problems. Although, again, I'm more a fan of the MCU and even going into television and having continuity. But hey, if you can't do that, because hey, I say it all the time, continuity is the enemy of lazy writers. Okay, you want to phone it in a little bit? Fine. Well, if you want to phone it in, use an established character. Doesn't that make sense, Dave? If you want to phone it in a little bit, make it a little easier on yourself, use an established character that people already are aware of, people already like. For instance, Gambit. Gambit's been almost completely, I think he's been in one Wolverine film. Why not have him in this?
Wow, if that had been Gambit, if Gambit had been one of the lead characters, I would have totally watched at least 5 or 6 episodes of
exactly,
this just for
exactly.
Gambit.
Just for Gambit. And then I don't want to mess up her name, but the character in the 90s X-Men's cartoon, the teenager who could fire like the little energy bolts.
Jubilee,
because I always mess up her name. I don't want to mess up her name. Why not have Jubilee in this? Wouldn't she have been perfect in this? The 90s X-Men cartoon version of Jubilee, wouldn't she have been perfect in The Gifted?
Yeah, I think well, there's a lot of really great characters that people have an affinity for that would have been fun to do in this show.
But Jubilee would have fit perfect in this story because it has the teenagers. Like, what if the sister was Jubilee? You know what I mean? What if the sister was Jubilee? Right. That would have been awesome.
Right. No, yeah, there's a lot of that's the thing. There's so much potential within the X-Men universe. That's the thing that I was kind of surprised at, because I was thinking I would recognize more of these characters. Like when I started using their powers, like, oh, that's so and so. Oh, that's so and so. Like like this guy. I couldn't figure out who this guy. Like, when I saw Polaris, I was like, well, that's obviously Polaris. So who is this guy? I still don't know who this guy's supposed to be. And for example, there's really great characters that they haven't even touched at all. Like when you talk about character like Sunspot, for example, from the New Mutants, an older, more mature version of Sunspot who maybe had run with the X-Men at one point, who fell out of favor because of the whole Fallen Angels storyline. Like, you give him like a twisted backstory, and he's come back and he's with what remains of the X-Men, and they're trying to cobble this group together and figure out what happened to them. Because he's got some fun, superhuman based powers. He'd have like a cool effect that wouldn't be too expensive to do on a TV budget. Like Sunspot would have been great, and that's the problem. It's like, and that's what I think. Because I think you've hit the nail on the head, Eric. I mean, because that's for me. Sometimes with this genre entertainment, that's all I need is just some easy, low hanging fruit, and I go, oh, hey, that's so and so. That's cool. I'll watch it again. With this, but I'm like going, I don't know who these people are. So I don't know if I need to follow this. So
and one role that seems to be totally absent, that seems obvious to me. And again, it's like, okay, you want to be lazy, you don't want to deal with continuity. Well, there are tricks. There are good tricks to use. For instance, why not there were so many cameos in the first X-Men film. And why not take one of those characters to tie it in, like one of those characters in those montage of scenes? I offer Jubilee as one example, but you could have taken like an X-Men from that era, and they could be like the leader. They could be like, or not even necessarily the leader, but the mentor of this group of young heroes. And there was no mentor role. They're all young. Nobody seems to know what happened to the X-Men, or at least they don't talk about it. But it would have been neat if they had just taken somebody to be sort of that Obi-Wan Kenobi role, and it could have been someone that tied in directly to the X-Men who was an X-Men. And then we don't know what happened to the X-Men because he doesn't like to talk about it, or she doesn't like to talk about it because it's too traumatizing. That seems obvious to me, and I don't understand why they didn't do that.
Or it could even be one of those things where, sometimes they do those psychic blocks, and for some reason the character can't remember what happened, because since we're dealing with mutants and mutant abilities, someone could have blocked out of that one character's mind, the memory of what happened for whatever reason, and that's the thing too. And like I said, because we discussed this or Runaways, and now I'm like going, man, we should have just done Runaways. So kind of a bad choice on my part, but I honestly, I just remembered seeing some of the teasers for the show, and I thought, this might be fun. Let's give this a go, But after the first episode, I'm like, I'm good.
So I think one of the things we kind of agreeing on here is it's not like it's bad. It's just that you and I, being big genre fans, we've seen this so many times before. We're not seeing anything new, and we're not seeing anything that really brings us back, where it has that retro feel. We are the retro rogues after all. So we don't have anything that's bringing us back and saying, hey, that's like, that's their version of Wolverine, or, what I mean? Like that's their version of Cyclops or something like that. We're like, okay, that's cool. There just wasn't any of that. It was like they were trying to kind of, they were kind of trying to have their cake and eat it too, for lack of a better term. It was like they were trying to accomplish too much with too little, with a quote unquote fully original show that's still supposed to be part of the X-Men.
Yeah, and then actually, James just brought up who it is. He said it's actually Eclipse.
That's a character I'm not very familiar with, by the way. Actually, I'm not familiar with Eclipse at all. So, and he said Thunderbird was one of them as well. He says.
See, I thought I recognized Thunderbird, but they just didn't do enough with him. I mean, he should have. See, in my mind, Thunderbird would have been great to lead this show. That's a great X-Men that they haven't done a lot with. That's a lot of fun. I would have been totally down with him actually just leading the show.
James did say
Thunderbird
earlier that he stopped watching the series first season, like episode 6 is when he jumped it and stopped watching.
Yeah. See, Eclipse is not a character I'm too terribly familiar with either. But Thunderbird would have worked. I would have stuck around for Thunderbird. And that's a great character that they've hardly done anything with. He's got a really interesting backstory that for those of us that are living out here in the Southwest, that would be really kind of fun to have Thunderbird lead the show. So I would have been totally down for Thunderbird. Hell, I used to love Braystar. Why not? Let's have a Native American lead a show. Let's do it. I'm down. So, and again, that's the thing. That would have been fun. I would have loved that. So I would have watched episode 2 right there, James. You would have fixed it for me. So that's because like I said, I thought one of them was Thunderbird, but I wasn't sure. So, I guess that's kind of our thing. And again, like I said, it's not a bad show. I'm not saying it's a bad show at all. It's just for me, there's not enough there for me to want to check out episode 2, unfortunately. And it's, and like, for example, as much as I love Batman, I had a hard time with Gotham for the same reason. And that has a lot more easier to see low-hanging fruit for me as a Batman fan. But it's just one of those things. Anytime they try to do that X-Men without the X-Men, X-Men show without the X-Men, a Batman show without Batman, a Superman show without Superman. You know, Krypton was the same thing. I gave Krypton a shot. I think Krypton was a little bit more fun than The Gifted, but Krypton was another one of those things. Like, I tried to watch Krypton and it was kind of interesting. But it for me, it sometimes those kind of shows bring up too many questions. It's like, well, wait a minute. If that's happening, then what about that other thing that's supposed to happen? How is this? There you go. Well, thanks. I'm glad you're there for me. Like I said, that's like Thunderbird, man. Like, if Thunderbird had been leading this show, and honestly, again, like Sunspot would have been fun. I think any one of those, just a X-Men character we're a little bit more familiar with in a lead role, because I'm not too familiar with Eclipse. Like I said, the characters I recognized immediately was Blink. Blink is really easy to see. It's Blink, and I enjoyed seeing Blink. And then, like I said, I saw Polaris right off the bat, and I really enjoyed seeing Polaris. But I just think we needed some, again, like those characters, for those of us that are long-term X-Men fans, just some more obvious powers so we know who they're supposed to be. Oh, that's so-and-so. Oh, that's so-and-so. Oh, that's cool. You know,
well,
and then
I would say you need to even go beyond obvious powers. You need to name them, and you need to maybe even have something in their costuming and stuff like that where you're kind of brought back to it. That's one thing that I think Fox lacked a lot of, that courage for whatever reason to actually make X-Men look like X-Men, because they made the argument, oh, that's going to be cheesy. Nobody wants that. And then look at the MCU. They all look like the comics and everybody loves it. So, you know, I think that they were trying to follow that Fox model. So I don't know. But Bobby is in the chat. He said, hello, gents. I agree. Tossing in a few unused X-Men could have kept me coming back for this show. So I assume Bobby saw it as well and was a little underwhelmed.
Yeah, and then we've got another comment here actually from James. He says that Eclipse is similar to Sunspot, but made for this universe. And I guess that's why I thought of Sunspot, because that's who I kept hoping this was. I mean, if this had been Sunspot, I think I'd been a little bit more willing to roll with what's going on. But then, like I said, I like the idea of giving him the Fallen Angels storyline, and he was estranged from the X-Men, so that's why he wasn't with them or more in contact. It would explain why he didn't know exactly what happened with the X-Men, and he was maybe on the outs a little bit with them at the time. And then him kind of regrouping, and then the other characters kind of knowing who he was and being familiar with him. But, you know, I don't know. I just feel it's one of those things. Sometimes with this stuff, I feel like if they would just look a little bit more at the comics and pull a little bit more directly from it, you know what I mean? That sometimes they get something a little bit stronger.
And James is hitting the nail on the head right here, because I was thinking about this as well. Not specifically the New Mutants, but he says, I think because of the New Mutant movie, they couldn't use Sunspot. I think that was a big issue with a lot of the characters that we're talking about. They didn't want to use them because they were already going to be used for a film project. And I think this is what this show was trying to navigate, was the issue of, oh, well, what are they going to do in the films? Well, let's just create new characters. And no, I don't think that was I don't think that was a good approach. But I think James hit the nail on the head that they didn't use Sunspot because the characters' rights were tied up with a different project.
And see, and I want to see the New Mutants movie. I've wanted to see it for a while, and it keeps getting pushed back. And that would have been a great thing for Disney to release. I said that before. Right now, with everything that's going on, is a perfect time to release New Mutants. I mean, they could make some pretty good bank with it, like that Crazy Trolls movie did. I mean, you know, why not? Why not? You know, they clearly don't have a plan for what they're going to do with the New Mutants film. It doesn't fit in really with the MCU, in all honesty, because that's a part of the old Fox X-Men continuity. As messed up as it is, it's supposed to fit within that universe. You know, why not just release the New Mutants movie right now?